Welcome to Digitel Talk Podcast, where we spotlight entrepreneurs and innovators leveraging technology related to telecoms to drive positive global impact. Welcome to the final episode of the 2024 Digitel Talk Discovery Series. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Frankie Spignolo.
Hello, Ian.
Hello there. And we're actually recording this episode on the last day of the year, on the 31st of December, 2024. And over the time, we've managed to record 36 episodes. So I think there's something for everyone. And there's a whole mixed bag, which we'll be talking about as well.
Today's episode is sponsored by IFG Consulting Europe, a leading business growth consultancy representing promising software providers selling to the telecoms, enterprise and mobile markets in Europe. Go to ifgconsultingeurope.com to find out more.
Welcome to the podcast, Frankie, and I think calling it the Discovery Series was the right name. What do you think?
Certainly, anytime you embark on a new journey, the first phase being about discovery, I think is always important. And it's been a really interesting journey, this one, over the last 5 years. And I think we are going to take some time here to reflect on maybe some of our favorite moments, but also the key themes that we saw appearing throughout the interviews. And also important insights from our guests and from the efforts that these companies are making in the world as we move into 2025. Because as we brace ourselves for all that this new year could bring, it makes me want to be grateful and to thank everybody, you first and foremost, Ian, for having me involved in the podcast, and to our tremendous team behind the scenes, Helen and Rebecca. It's been a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. And the same to have you as a co-host has made it a lot easier. And I think together it's worked well. As I like to say to people, there's chalk and cheese here on the podcast. And people have to work out who's chalk and who's cheese.
I think we are sometimes one and sometimes the other, but the good thing is there's a balance, and that does seem to be responding with our audience, which of course also has to do with the valuable, incredible guests that we have had this year. But really, that's what this is all about, right? Our listeners. So to all of our listeners out there, to our audience, it's really been exciting to see you tune in over the past year from all around the world. We've actually had listeners in 54 countries and more than 280 cities. We know that the interest in our guests and this unique programming is seen as valuable, from London to Kenya and back to California. And we really are grateful to our audience for your continued support. And we look forward to bringing you more informative content with that continued focus on the best and brightest in tech for good, which really, Ian, is what brought you and I together from the beginning, is this idea of tech for good. So as you reflect on our year of investigating and exploring the field, did you have some favorite moments?
Yes, I think when you say reflect on it, there are favorite moments. Maybe just to recap for those who don't know how we came to do the podcast, was that having been a Glomoa judge, I realized that there's some great stories untold, if you like, or slipping through the net through the Glomo Awards process. I would like to shout out here for Sean Collins, who's the lead judge, because he was the one who also allowed me to become a judge. And he's a great supporter of us as well.
Yeah, he was our first guest.
One of our first guests as well. And as it happened about 3 or 4 years ago, that initially the idea came about, and it was last Christmas that you and I actually looked each other in the eye and said, we're going to do this, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we neither of us chickened out at that point.
Here we are. Yeah, right. No, we did not.
The other thing which I've really enjoyed and highlights is discovering these various people that we maybe will, or definitely would not have met otherwise, and the great work that they're doing. And then We did manage to have a media partnership, official one, so they're promoting us as well at their event, which I particularly enjoyed. But it then gets a bit spooky when you actually then meet people you've interviewed, never met before, and you actually know them, feel you know them quite well, but that's because you interviewed them beforehand. So that was also a highlight to meet those one or two people.
And we have gotten to know our guests like that in quite a personal way, right? In the long format episodes that we trialed during the Discovery series, half of the time that we spent with our guests was talking about how they felt they became the person that wanted to dedicate their life and their purpose and their professional career to making this kind of change. And it really has been inspiring to get to hear that. And really inspiration through one of those companies was the kicker for you, Hello Tractor, which was actually is known by Obama, and they have a lovely quote on their website from President Obama. And you found them and you said they were in the GLOMO Awards, and they need more attention. Somebody's got to know about these guys.
That's right. So I've been able to highlight some of mine. What about your favorite moments, would you say, and highlights?
For our listeners, for those of you who know me, and in case you don't know, my background is in industry advocacy. So to have the institutions and the industry organizations like the ITU and the Fiber to the Home Europe organization and entities like the Unconnected on and be able to delve into these overarching guidances, governance, not necessarily regulation, but benchmarks on how we work together to a more inclusive future, right? How do we really measure tech for good, like the UN sustainability goals? And having the ITU on, we interviewed Dr. Jamusi both before the ITU's event in India this year, WTSA 24. And afterwards. And the kind of digital public infrastructure future that these entities are really beginning to work together to help create, to learn from the mistakes of the legacy locked systems that we know are economically and sustainably unfeasible at this point. And we only hope that we're not too late. And so that really, for me and for my background and where my passion lie, was the most interesting, especially long term, both for myself and for our listeners, because as we move forward, our plan is to continue having conversations with these kind of organizations and to bring our listeners more information so that they can take action, just like they can get involved commercially with a lot of the businesses and the guests that we have interviewed through the year. And whilst we met with the ITU and with the Fiber to the Home organization out of Europe, but this was always going to be a theme for us because this is how you and I really came together with the Unconnected, and having Mia Thompson on, who is I think she's the chief operating officer at the Unconnected, with Andrew Atkinson as their CEO, who Andrew and I have known each other since Virgin Mobile and my early IMVNOX launching days. It was really, these kind of sites were still 3 billion people unconnected. And this was a theme that kept recurring throughout all of our conversations. And then Tech for Good is addressing this digital equality. And this means a lot of things, but those are my favorite moments. And I think that digital inclusion piece really took us to have some of our interesting guests, Althea, which was that decentralized, open, Bitcoin back mesh network, which was incredible. Female CEO. But again, about digital inclusion, right? Internet to the fringe. And how big really is that fringe? Or tell it, a small MNO in the UK who we love and was really doing wonderful things with not spots and real rural areas. And even Fusion Tech, which is about charging and batteries, right? So we have a mesh network, we have an MNO, and we have Fusion Tech, this solar energy, efficient energy component that's about size and being able to be remote. It was a beautiful arc. And I can go on about digital inclusion and governments and industry regulation forever, but one of the reasons those industry bodies are coming to us to have these conversations is because this is the path to the tipping point. All of us agree, here's how, let's do this. And that's also why we want to share these stories.
Yeah, I think there was interesting news on Althea. I was noticing that they've working now with Globestar, and it's band 53, which is an LTE band. So that's basically from satellites. They'll be using their technology. So I think they're moving from that rural connectivity to maybe just the globe in the next period. So that's good news to hear on what they're doing as well, I think.
Yeah, and Telit has won several grants from the UK Innovation and is really working, again, about solutions that could and will create a digital public infrastructure, right? Which takes us back to those institutions. And so for me, I think that is super important. It was incredible for me to be part of those conversations. And I'm really looking forward to that as a continuing theme as we move forward into 2025. Ian, what was one of the most important themes that you really felt appeared throughout the year?
Yeah, I think it's good to try and group some of these ideas and themes around what our customers are doing. One which I'd like to highlight is I'm calling living standards. And to me, there are two major parts of that, which is one, the ability to earn income, because with income, guess what? You can actually do things, you can buy things, you can improve your standard of living, send your children to school and the rest of it. But actually, there's another part of living standards, which is actually improving the environment in which you live, which is not necessarily the same thing, particularly, I think, as we move towards urban areas, and we'll just see the congestion that's happening. So there are different ways of living standards being affected. If we stick with the first one of our guests was called Dots Inc., which are also trying to join the dots. That's where the name comes from, who also won the award for the GITEX Africa Nigeria Award. And they're basically giving pretty much mud hut villages with no electricity and no internet connectivity, first of all, with intranet, but then also giving them an income stream through AI tagging. And that's the clever thing, I think, about it. So they're bringing in jobs from Japan, of all places, but I don't want to steal the thunder too much, and people can listen to the podcast if they're interested in that topic.
Totally.
That's certainly one of the fascinating stories, how that came to be as well. You mentioned earlier on, and you're right, it's one of my favorites, of course, is Hello Tractors, now partnering with John Deere Tractors, which is a well-known brand of this part of the neck of the woods.
Especially to this Kentucky girl.
Okay. And I'm sure you can know how to drive one as well. And the thing is, like, just to give the potential of what they're trying to do is 700,000 tractors are required in Nigeria alone, supposedly. So that's the potential of it. Because mainly agriculture at the moment is not done with any proper farming equipment. And it's not just a question of, let's say, industrialization. It's to do with the footprint, being able to use the land efficiently, but then also on the back of that, the income stream that they can actually till their land in a better way. Right. They can work the land better. They'll get better income, again, education. So it's a full life cycle, if you like, about living standards there. And it's based on the premise of using an app to start off to actually work out what's the potential yield that you can achieve against which you can then take a loan out on a tractor. That's behind tractors. So that's a great one. And one more I just wanted to highlight is AimSum, who were interesting for us also from the perspective that obviously 2024 was the Olympics in Paris. And they actually did the urban planning, if you like, or traffic planning around Paris for the Olympics. So that's actually not at all a trivial thing in such an event, as you can imagine, of the various aspects of not just vehicles, but also public transport, or also people, pedestrians, if you like, around the city, emergency services. And another piece of news around them is that they've now won a project with Manchester, which is one of the larger UK cities. So they're doing great things. And part of their mission is actually to say improving the environment and making cities more habitable generally. So hats off to all those three. And with that, what did you want to add to that?
I think what is interesting as we talk about living standards and digital inclusion, at least for me, is this theme that we saw, which is really about quality of life. And as that relates to accessibility and how the size and scale and sensors turned movement into information and communication and clarified sound, and really have both from a startup standpoint, because it's really unaddressed. And this is the kind of thing where you need really almost a personal experience to truly be able to create a solution that works, right? Somebody who doesn't suffer from deaf blindness in some way, which most of us will as we age. We will, most of us move to that direction. You can have lifelong, you can be born with it, you can have accident-based deaf blindness. And so some of our guests were amazing. We actually met Wisp, who was made one of Time's technology inventions of 2024 this year. Yeah. And we met Wisp at MWC.
I think it's just worth mentioning for audiences, might be very obvious to the people, but it's actually a shortening of whispering. That's where the word comes from.
Yes. And we did a 10 by 10 questions in 10 minutes with the CEO and his CTO and their senior engineer. And it was incredible, the impact. We really are on the verge of providing to, again, something that probably will affect us all to some impactful degree during our lifetime, which was incredible. And Wisp, you should take a look at them and listen to it. It's one of our fast podcasts. So this is a great way. And then you can check out the Times article, but also Hand Poem. Somebody else that we met at Mobile World Congress, and goodness, Oriol Ribeiro, what a passionate entrepreneur. He is one of those polymaths, right? He's a musician and an engineer. And Hand Poem is a spatial computing device that's a glove. And I know, of course, we couldn't get through any conversation this year without AI, so I'll leave this part till that theme per se, but the information, the clarity, the understanding that our devices, these sensors, that they can transmit and that they can allow is life-changing, quality of life-changing, and was really exciting to see and to listen to with those guests. And really what's amazing is that it's not just small startups who are doing this, right? Okay. And Wisp's Time article and the awards that they have seen and the participation from amazing musicians like Ma that has Hand Poem has actually experienced. We interviewed a few carriers, MNOs, who tell it being one of them doing their own very unique thing, but Dialogue Axiata being another who has taken this tech for good idea and is trying to embed it into their DNA. When we spoke to them, they're doing a lot of different things around all of our themes, sustainability and digital inclusion and AI and IoT. And in the accessibility piece, they are really carving out, they've got their app called Deaf Talk, like Hawk, but they're really carving out time and teams and prioritizing long-term loyalty and usability within their subscriber base as a profitable business model for them as a carrier group. They're doing agricultural stuff, right? Like we talked about a little bit with Hello Tractor. And I know that you really enjoyed that conversation with them as well for some of the other reasons around that agricultural thing and Hello Tractor and where that sort of thread is lying.
But I think you bring up an interesting point. I do believe they are leading and using sustainability and tech for good to actually add value to their subscribers and their customers. And I think other parts of the world learn from that and increase their ability to support their subscribers and their customers. So I think that's a good one. And based on your comment and the farming, you're quite right. It's a slightly different angle. But if we move on to IoT for a moment, and sticking with that Dialog Axiata, they were one of the second companies that I say inspired me a bit to start the program with yourself. And there, I loved this sort of local ecosystem they built between a university that could do soil samples, the farmers tilling the fields as they've done for hundreds of years, and then there was a middleman. They built their own IoT devices to be able to do some clever stuff so that they could actually again become more efficient, put on IoT as a theme. But of course, it could have sat somewhere else as well.
And it goes back to monetization and modifying this legacy commercial model, right? And reprioritizing focus and investment in that future, even if the payoff. And on that interview, we really talked with those team leads about it only took X amount of years for that to begin paying off. And then it did. And so if you really want to hear more about that monetization piece, go and check out the Dialog Axiata interview. Certainly for teams in MNOs, they've got a host of things. But IoT was consistent, right? This showed up all over the place.
It's one of those things, a bit like AI, but of course AI and all these things, you need to collect the data.
Intertwined.
And they're intertwined. And so one of the first companies who also have a podcast that approached us was a company called Williot. And from that perspective, basically they call it Pixel, and it's a passive programming tag. So you can program a tag if you like. RFID is what most people maybe have heard of, but it's not. It's more intelligent, if you like, intelligent RFID. But the interesting thing is passive, so there's no battery involved. Now, the exciting news is one of my favorite interviews, I say, as well, worth listening to exactly how they use it. But the interesting news, which I remember was mentioned on the podcast, that there might be some big projects coming along the line where their technology is going to be used, let's say, at scale. One of them being the Royal Mail in the UK are now going to be using it and tested various technologies. And that's now also been in the press for a few months. So check that one out as well. And then moving on to one which is a different field totally. If you can talk about connected cows, this is where we're at now. And this was the University of Kansas. Brad White is the professor there who is working with an IoT provider, SI. And it's really about the prevention of pneumonia, or let's say early detection of pneumonia in cattle, fundamentally. Again, an interesting podcast and to listen to. And again, shout out for the work they're doing. It's supposedly the largest killer of cows once they're weaned off the cow. So what other topics, themes do you have?
I really like, I think, again, IoT and the sensors, and even just on that topic, which I think comes over to one of the other major themes around sustainability, is that forest guard. And this is going from what you were just talking about in the Internet of the cows, right, to the Internet of the trees, and using the similar kind of passive, low battery requirement things to be able to predict and prevent forest fires. And I think that's really cool because it's hard to measure that kind of impact. And we, again, going back to the digital public infrastructure for disaster relief and emergency preparedness, which is for me a key piece of this. I really liked Forest Guard, and I don't know necessarily why they popped to mind, but they were very practical in the way that they were using sustainability, like the other ones who I loved, because they are turning old phones into jewelry through the removing of the heavy metals in the e-waste recycling process, not the heavy metals, the fine metal.
That's closing the loop, I think you're talking
Closing
about.
the loop.
We discovered that during their podcast that they even did that, because that actually was not the key
Right, it's not their key business model. Their key business model is about sustainability, but it's also about accessibility in the way that their core model is addressing e-waste. And I thought they did it in a brilliant way, and very much Forest Guard. They need information on what their impact is. So Janacycle, which was another one of the companies that we interviewed, they had another aspect of sustainability in which they were taking both providing information on how much impact you were making through your sustainability efforts, but then also taking sponsorships to do countermeasures, plant a tree when this carbon footprint action takes place. And so it was both sides of it. And they were doing that also through guidelines around sustainability, benchmarking, something that the Unconnected is also doing in trying to track the positive initiatives that companies are undertaking to address their sustainable impact on the planet. And I really loved that we saw both sides of that. We saw really preventative sort of sustainability. We saw recycling sustainability, and then we saw a positive opposite reaction type of sustainability.
The word that crosses my mind is accountability, which I know that Jane was saying. They're talking about greenwashing was one of the topics that came up a few times.
Yeah.
There are lots of people trying to do good, but actually they can't. It's claim, and it's like what they call CO2 credits, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's superficial rather than actually getting on with it. And I think that's the thing about almost all of our guests, in fact, all of them, is they are doers rather than worrying about the bean counting and the counting side of it as well. There's another company you have in the sustainability category, I think, that you wanted to bring up.
Oh, yeah. This is, again, so how I first got into tech was through wastewater management in Africa. And WMW is an IoT company, a sensor company, but one of their most elegant solutions really is in sustainability and water management. Having watched wastewater management now for almost 20 years, it is one of the most important themes of sustainability that we have in our world right now.
Yeah, one of the battlegrounds which I came up at an event was a gentleman we were actually talking about data centers, and some of them are using such high volumes of water, and you saying society's going to have to decide, are we going to feed the data center with water or the humans? That battle will be something which rages. And he was trying to simplifying it down to water because, as you say, it's such a precious good for all of us, and certainly humanity, one of those basics that without which we cannot survive even a few days. Coming back just to do a segue between the data centers, there's some huge large language model data centers being built, but why it's being built? And that's the topic of AI, which is also one of the themes that we wanted to cover. If I can just mention some of the interviews that we did there. So Invinium was one of them about reducing CO2 using AI by getting things right first time. And this is about being able to plan and inspect and make sure that before you dig trenches and lay fiber and other things, that's done operationally correctly. And they were lucky enough, the news on them was that they're part of the Deutsche Telekom and T-Mobile T-Challenge. And out of, I think, 350 entrants, they came second. So they're really pleased with that. So that was a nice one.
They're about efficiency, right? Across the board. And I love efficiency.
Yeah. And then one of the biggest parts of the energy usage in the telecoms is actually the radio access network, right? So all the towers out there and the last mile, if you like, to your handset, between your handset and those towers. And a company called NetAI we interviewed, short format, who again doing optimization, particularly around energy saving. And using AI, there are 30 to 40% energy savings possible. So that's pretty cool. And then you already mentioned Forest Guard, but what I like about Forest Guard, the way I'd like to condense it into is we've got the forests speak. The forests are able to actually elaborate, help, call for help and say, I've got a problem. And if that's where we're at, and that's the one I particularly like. So as you mentioned, AI is pretty much pervasive and everywhere. Those were three, which I think are worth calling out at this time. So Frankie, anything you want to add on the A side before we move on to the final wrap-up section?
I think for me, AI is less of its own thing and more, that's how we are getting better. It's how we're getting smarter. It's how we're able to be more sustainable. It's how the world is getting smaller, right? Because we can communicate to each other with hand gestures and dance. And the data from our heartbeat and the data from the tree is the heat around it and how many insects have landed on it, and the data from the cow. And so AI for me is less about its own thing and more about how each company is using it to transform, to become more efficient, to hit these benchmarks faster, to make things more interoperable, because the business models have to change. So AI is like a spoon at the end of the day. You got all this information and AI is able to go in there and pick it up and feed us what we need to know. But it really gave me a sense of hope for the industry and the future of really tech for good as a functional spoke in the wheel and the people behind these companies and the purpose. And so before we say goodbye for now, we'll see you all in Barcelona or possibly before then at CES and hopefully at other events through the year, like with the ITU and others like Network X, which we were at this year.
We're looking forward to having you listening to us and contributing to the success of this podcast going forward. I think we're both excited with reflectively what we've achieved, but also looking forward. Thanks for taking the time to listen to our new podcast. If you have any feedback or know of any stories to be told involving digital technology and telecoms doing good, then please do let us know via our email, getintouch@digiteltalk.com. Also, feel free to send us a message on LinkedIn. It'd be great to hear from you.
Before we go, if you've enjoyed today's episode and would like to support the podcast, then don't forget to give us a follow and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Also, if you'd like to leave us a review or share it with your colleagues, it really helps us on the channel. Thanks so much for being a part of our audience today, and hopefully you'll join us next time.
That's all we've got time for, so it's goodbye from me.
And that's goodbye from him.
Bye for now.